Dounreay was the centrepiece of Britain's early research and development of nuclear energy in the 20th century. Today, the most northerly nuclear site in the European Union is redundant, its mission complete after 4 decades of pioneering work. The research facilities where Britain's top scientists and engineers once worked now reverberate to the sound of demolition teams working on the biggest site closure project in the UK nuclear industry. The site was developed in the 1950s by the UK Atomic Energy Authority to experiment with new ways to generate electricity from plutonium and uranium.
The area had been chosen because it was remote and thinly populated. By the end of August 1956, the 8th tier was nearly complete. And this was probably the most complicated stainless steel vessel ever produced in Britain. Britain's first power-producing fast breeder reactor is safely housed.
2 fast breeder reactors and a materials test reactor were built between 1955 and 1974. They were serviced by research laboratories and industrial plants for the manufacture and reprocessing of nuclear fuel. These plants also service reactors in the UK and overseas. The Royal Navy added a small test site for submarine power systems, known as Vulcan. A national shortage of energy supplies in the 1950s spurred the scientists and engineers at Dounreay to develop new sources of electricity. They were the first in the world to supply electricity from a reactor that could also breed its own fuel. But the energy crisis of the 1950s had evaporated by the 1980s thanks to an abundant worldwide supply of nuclear material. In 1988, the UK government decided there was no economic reason to continue research and cancelled the programme. The last reactors closed down at Dounreay in 1994 and the fuel plants a few years later. Apart from the smaller site at Vulcan, which continues to function, the UK government has no further use for the site, so it needs to be cleaned up and closed down. Today, the workforce is taking the site apart. Old plants are being cleaned out, stripped down and demolished. Radioactive materials were used in about 50 different facilities, and many also contained hazardous chemicals. Great care needs to be taken when cleaning out these facilities to protect workers and the environment from harm. Some facilities are still too radioactive to allow workers to enter. So robotic equipment is used instead. Decommissioning these old plants creates a variety of industrial, chemical and nuclear waste. Much of this waste can be recycled, but some of it is too hazardous, so new facilities have been built to store or dispose of this waste in a way that protects future generations from harm. Much of the plutonium and uranium left over from the research programme can also be used again, so this has been packaged in a way that will allow it to be returned to national stocks. Parts of the ground are contaminated, and practices in the fuel plants at the peak of their operation in the 1960s have left a legacy of radioactive particles on nearby beaches and the seabed. Decommissioning has steadily reduced the major hazards left by the research programme, and the emergency planning zone around the site has shrunk to 1/5 of its previous size. So far, more than 160 facilities have been demolished. Some 50 companies are at work on the clean-up, providing jobs for more than 1,500 people at the site and a similar number in companies across Scotland. These companies are delivering some 14,000 separate projects that make up the site closure programme. The pace of demolition has averaged almost 100 square feet every day since responsibility for the site passed to the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority in 2005 and a private contractor brought in to carry out the work. The contractor does this through a subsidiary site licence company known as Dounreay Site Restoration Limited. It must ensure the work is carried out to the standards demanded by independent regulators for the safety of workers, the environment and the nuclear materials. Each of these pieces of work is part of a complex programme designed to eliminate and reduce all the hazards and return the site to brownfield condition within the next 2 decades. It costs the UK government up to £150 million a year to clean up Dounreay. The cost and timescale could reduce through new decommissioning techniques and the award of a new contract in 2012 to complete the clean-up. A major part of the site closure plan involves looking after the radioactive waste it produces. Much of this waste is low in radioactivity and can be disposed of safely in shallow vaults that are being constructed next to the site. The higher activity wastes are being immobilised in containers filled with cement and stored until new facilities are developed for its long-term management near site and near surface. Nuclear fuel that can be reused to generate electricity is being packaged in a way that allows it to be returned to national stocks. The site closure will result in the loss of 1 in every 5 jobs in the local economy. So the NDA and the site licence company are working with local agencies to help workers and companies find ways to make the transition to new jobs and new business. The skills needed to decommission an experimental nuclear site like Dounreay are very similar to those needed in the emerging new industries of marine energy and decommissioning of offshore oil and gas platforms. Dounreay's legacy to 20th century Britain was to provide the know-how to generate electricity from plutonium and uranium. A new legacy is being forged from its decommissioning in the skills and expertise that are making safe one of the most complex nuclear sites ever built.